Welcome to Yoga Land's Yoga Teacher Companion. I'm your host, Jason Crandell, and I am going to teach you the most important thing about A, you developing your arm balances, and B, you teaching arm balances. Now, this is a very overlooked but important technical insight about almost every arm balance, which is this. To transition into nearly every single arm balance, you do not lift up. You move forward, and frequently you move forward and downward. I'm going to say it again. In the vast majority of arm balances, with very rare exceptions, the dominant action that takes you into the posture is not up. It's almost always forward, and oftentimes forward and downwards. And oddly enough, sometimes downwards and backwards, okay? Now, I don't know if you believe me, so I'm going to show you this. And this is so important, everyone, because the most common mistake that I see people making when they're transitioning into arm balances and not getting there is they're trying to lift up. And if you are trying to lift up, you're probably doing the technique wrong. Now, one more quick thing before I go into this, everybody, and show it, which is, attributes help. So the stronger you are and the more dexterous you are and the greater range of motion you are, those attributes contribute to the ability to do arm balances. There is no doubt about it. But the thing that you are looking for when you are looking to get into balance is balance. And balance is not up. Balance is forward. Let me show you with Bakasana, and then I'll just run through a bunch of these, and then I'll tell you what you can start to do about this immediately in your own practice and in your teaching. So watch me set up, and I'll just do a half a dozen arm balances, and we're gonna see this dominant action. So when I set up, everybody, let's say I'm gonna start with Bakasana. I'll go this way. So I'm gonna start with Bakasana. Now there's different setups for Bakasana. I'll go this way. There's different setups for Bakasana, but what I want you to see is when I start, my hands are in front of me. So what I need to do, everybody, is to get into Bakasana. Yes, there's a lift at the onset, but look, when I go to get into Bakasana, I'm not lifting up. Watch, I'm going forward, right? Now, same thing when I'm going into, I'm gonna show a bunch of these, and then I'll break some down in greater detail, but I wanted you to get the concept of forward first. So, Parsva Bakasana. Watch. I lift up a little bit at the beginning, but then what takes me up is not going up, it's going forward. Same thing as if I were gonna do Ekapada Galavasana. Watch, I'm not lifting up, look where my hands are. I have to go forward, right? Same thing if I'm doing Ekapada Kundanyasana. Watch, I set up, and do I lift up to get into the pose? I do not. I go forward to get into the pose. Same thing if I'm doing another version, Ekapada Kundanyasana. How do I get up? I lift up a little bit at the onset, and then watch where I go. I go forward. And then you have, like I said earlier, you have some situations actually where you're not going forward, you're actually going backwards, okay? So watch how I set up, and then we're gonna get this point about, it's all about understanding where your balance point is. Balance point is not up there, it's there, it's forward, okay? So we're gonna see something like, we'll look at Bhujapidasana, right? So in Bhujapidasana, right, my balance is not forward. In Bhujapidasana, my balance is actually, I have to look where my body weight is to get into the pose. I don't lift up. I actually go backwards, right? I have to go backwards for Bhujapidasana, right? I go backwards to get there, okay? So I've totally biffed that. So one more time, what do I have to do for Bhujapidasana? I have to go backwards. I lean my weight backwards for the pose. So what I want us to really get here is this. I will look around the room watching students work on Bakasana. And the most common mistake, right? And this is what I'm going to show, and we're going to really see this clearly. The most common mistake when someone is struggling to get into Bakasana, I'll even hear this. I'll even hear good, loving, caring teachers telling their students to lift their feet up. No. You don't lift the feet up in these poses. The feet are lifted up in these poses because you are moving forward. Watch. If I am here, if I am in this phase right here of Bakasana, and I'm like lifting a foot, right? Or maybe even lifting 2 feet. I'll see this all the time. People like lift a foot. But just look where my weight is and look where my balance point is. My weight is where it's behind my balance point. So it doesn't matter how much like tiptoe I play, right? I'm too far back. So when we think about this, everyone, if we just think about this logically, and I know you know the answer to this, right? But what are you going to be centered over? What is your weight going to be centered over on top of in an arm balance? Your hands. So what you have to see is that in most arm balances, you start off with your hands in front of you, which means in order to get balance and find the balance point, if my hands are in front of me and I'm lifting my legs up or I'm lifting my butt up, that's never going to help me, okay? I have to go forward. So watch this again, everybody, with this in mind, okay? So if I set up and I have my hands in Bakasana, right? And I might even start with my hands a little bit in, right? And we're not going over all the details of the poses, right? I just want you to really get this one concept, because if you get this one concept, light bulbs for you and your students, especially when you show this, are gonna go off. So watch where my hands are, everybody. My hands are out in front of me. So if I lift up and look where my weight is, those of you that can see me, right? If you're just listening to the audio version, just picture Bakasana. Your hands are in front of you, and where's the hips? The hips are a little bit behind you, right? So if I'm kind of leaning forward and I'm lifting those feet and I'm kind of wondering, I keep falling back on my feet, it's because my body weight is not yet centered over my hands. So trying to lift up is not the right direction of motion for the body. It's the right result, but it's not the right initial motion. So watch, now I'm gonna break each one of these poses down a little bit more clearly, and then I'll create more videos soon, everybody, so we can kind of really dig into teaching specific arm balances, but this is gonna help every student, every level get it, okay? So watch really closely. Or listen, and if you're just listening to the audio cast of this, and you'll be able to get it. So I'm setting up in Bakasana. My hands are out in front of me. My body weight is behind my hands. So what I have to do to begin with is I have to get my pelvis, so the weight of my body, I have to get it above my elbows. So this is the same if you're doing a straight elbow version of the pose or a bent elbow version of the pose, and I'll show both. My hands are in front of me. I lift the hips up. So I do at the onset have to lift up, right? I have to lift the hips up, but then everybody, my hands are still in front of me. They're the balance point. So all of the motion, once I have gotten my butt higher than my elbows, all of my motion is forward, right? And it's the same thing when you're doing a bent elbow version, or if you're watching a straight elbow version. It's the same thing. Now when I come down, it's actually kind of proof. I'm gonna do that again, those of you watching, watch me come down. When I come down in the pose, I do come a little bit down, but mostly I go back, right? So when you come out of the pose, you go back. So there is a lift, it's at the beginning. So when I lift a little bit, quote unquote, lift into the pose, it's before the final transition. So my hands are down, I'm pinching the knees against the outside of the arms, I'm elevating the hips a little bit, but I'm not in the pose. To get up, I grip with the fingers, I look forward, and then I shift forward, right? Now, same thing again in Parsva Bakasana, right? Just again, going a little bit deeper detail. There's a lot of different initial setups for Parsva Bakasana, side crane or side crow, but I'm not going to cover all of those setups. I just want to look at this final transition, right? So I said at the beginning that sometimes actually you will even go forward and down to get into the pose. This is the best pose, Parsva Bakasana, to understand this logic. Now this is for a bent elbow version of the pose, but those of you watching, you're going to see this really, really clearly. So I set up, I get everything where I want it to be. It's a balance, which means I need to find the balance point, which means I have to balance over my hands, and I just look down and I see my hands are forward. So what I'm going to do here is I lift the hips up, right? I lift the hips at the onset, but then actually watch how I get into the pose. I bend the elbows and I go down. I actually drop into the pose. And same thing, even if you're going to do the straight arm version of the pose. Doesn't matter, bent elbow or straight elbow. I still have to be forward. And then watch me come out of the pose. Back. Boom, boom. Forward, back. Ekapada Galavasana, another perfect opportunity to see this, right? I set up, I'm getting into that hip, and watch, when my hands go down, I don't put them right underneath me. I gotta take them forward. There's so many other techniques and concepts that I wanna show and teach you, but we gotta stick with this one. So watch, where am I going? When you watch this, everybody, this is another perfect version to say, I'm not lifting up. I'm going forward and down. That's the dominant motion. I start. When you're in the setup, the early phase setup of Ekapada Galavasana, you're actually pretty high, right? Because I'm in a standing ankle to knee pose. I'm not gonna stay this high in the pose. So I get those arms forward, then I get that foot to hook, and watch. The motion is forward. And you can reach the leg up or straight back, right? It's just kind of like a technique in the pose, but watch me come out of the pose. Back, okay? The big exception to all of these things that I'm talking about are inversions. So we kind of have to make a distinction right now that we're not talking about handstand, forearm balance, headstand. Those inversions, there is much more of a movement upward, but even in those, there's a dominant motion forward. So what I would love for you to do as a practitioner is brainstorm this on your mat. Like really get a feeling of starting on the ball of the feet, putting the hands out in front of you, and going forward. Now, the counter pressure to that movement forward is finger grip. So you have to really dig those fingers in. And also when you're doing more of a forward motion, when you're accentuating this forward motion, it's not really even accentuating, it's just doing the pose properly. If you feel like if this is really a new concept for you and you feel like you might overcorrect, put a bunch of blankets out in front of you. You don't want to take a face plant, right? You get it like a yoga mouth guard, right? But when you do these, everyone, as a practitioner, experiment. Just start to get this movement. I'm going to show one more thing that I think is really helpful. A lot of times when I see people struggling with this concept, I'll teach them this and I don't let them stay in the pose. So I just teach transitioning in and out, in and out. So those of you that are watching, watch. Those of you that aren't, I'm setting up for Bakasana again. But what I'm doing is I'm just going forward and then back. I just literally rock my body weight forward and then backwards. I rock forward into the hands and then backwards onto the feet. Forward into the hands and then backwards on the feet. And for anyone that is ever getting stuck in this, like I'm forward and trying to lift a foot thing, stop. come out, that's not the direction. Come down, reset, play with this transitional movement. And I'm telling you, if you get it for Bakasana, you might not have the attributes necessary to do a bunch of other arm balances. But if you do, the technique of these arm balances is gonna come so quick. Every single one of these arm balances that we looked at and more, they're predicated on this motion, okay? As a teacher, demonstrate this, communicate this, especially when you see your students trying to lift up, okay? I think this is gonna be a really huge technical improvement for a lot of you and for a lot of your students, and I hope this is really helpful.